I'm here with Quinn Elizabeth, who has written a book, Accepting the Ashes, A Daughter's Look at Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. We are at Occupy Wall Street, Tucson, and I think this book is relevant because here we are in a couple wars, still Iraq and Afghanistan, and Quinn is the daughter of a two-time Vietnam service member who came back from Vietnam. And why don't you tell me some of the story about being young and growing up with your father, who was a war veteran, and PSTD? PTSD.
The common name is post-traumatic stress disorder, but more and more people are dropping the disorder part because they're realizing that to have such reactions to war is actually human and common and happens to affects everybody, even though it affects people differently. So it's being looked at more and more not as a disorder. Not that there's something wrong with the person, with the veteran, the soldier who has such reactions. It's being seen now, and this is what I've come to, which is that it's like a soul wound. Like someone may come back with a damaged part of the body, and our system and our technology is very good at healing the physical wounds, but our culture has not yet realized that the internal wounds last, and people, service members, need assistance in tending those, and they are important because then the veteran comes home to civilian life and attempts to get on with life, and maybe they were married or partnered before, maybe not, then they get together with someone, attempt to have a family, and apparently right now the divorce rate for returning vets from Iraqi freedom and enduring freedom operations is like 80% divorce. So for my family, it went along all seemingly normal for a number of years.
And this is from your family with your father?
Yes. He came back and
just
tried to ignore the fact that he was there and get on with life, and he succeeded for quite a while, except for drinking alcohol, and that progressively got worse. And then in the 90s, he really started falling apart, so he came back in 67, and it took him that long to really not be able to hold it together any longer. And so then he pretty much hit bottom and almost was very close to killing himself, and then he had kind of a wave of interventions and trying to quit drinking, and the family broke apart, obviously, and then he died in 2004 accidentally, but he had lost everything.
And that's your father right there?
Yeah, this is him receiving a medal in the Navy, and this is him as a little boy. His father was a pilot in World War II and was shot down over the ocean, and his mother made him a uniform out of his dead father's uniform. So he was the only child and a boy, and he was brought up to be a hero like his father. And so he admitted later that he would stand up in firefights, and he got kind of addicted to the adrenaline of it all and the excitement. And then when he was older, his last couple years was when I reconnected with him, and it was when he started really realizing that he had nightmares. The drinking kept the nightmares away, and he knew that, and that he just wasn't able to deal with it alone, and yet he felt he was weak for not being able to deal with it. And I think that's in this book. It's very simple. It's a simple book. It offers a few, like 10 different ideas to keep in mind that seem to run through a lot of people's experience.
This book has been used by VA chaplains, hasn't it?
Yeah. And it's used by the National Chaplain Center in their outreach program to smaller communities around the country as they to returning veterans.
From what you've seen, I'm not sure on well informed you are on it, but is there support, like major support for post-traumatic stress disorder from the VA facilities?
There are PTSD units, inpatient, outpatient, also a whole branch now, which is new, for women veterans. Now, and it's all a work in progress. It depends on who you ask. They have the units, but sometimes getting into the VA system once a service member is not active anymore can be a long time, achingly long time if you're having trouble. And for family members who are having trouble, it can seem like forever. And but when my father came back, there was no such thing as PTSD. It wasn't called that. There was no name for it. So in that short amount of time, we're now starting to admit that there is such a thing as an internal wound. That Edward Tick writes very interesting things about PTSD. What he calls PTSD is post-traumatic soul distress, and I like that very much. And
do you receive any type of contact from anybody, loved ones that are having other loved ones coming back from Iraq or Afghanistan now that have read your book or thinking about reading your book? Or
there are apparently people right now reading my book that I have not heard from them, except one interesting thing is there's a quote on the back of the book from someone called The Waiting Wife, who at the time, this was in 2005, her husband had been gone 2 years out of 3 in Iraq, and I just heard from her, and he had to go 2 more times, and then he got an IED. He's not doing well. So it really does show me this. No book is going to fix it. A veteran has to want to heal. One of the suggestions or the things that I write about in here is you have to demand the right to heal. That it's part of the package of serving our country. That if someone goes, or if one of our loved one goes, we have to demand that they have the resources available to heal the internal wounds, not just the physical wounds, or if there were no physical wounds, there are soul wounds.
And what do you think is one of the major symptoms for a loved one to deal with somebody dealing with PTSD?
You mean, how do they demonstrate?
Yes, or how should they handle somebody that is going through post-traumatic stress disorder?
Well, this woman that just contacted me, she's been trying to work with the VA, and she hasn't felt a lot of support. So you have to be the squeaky wheel, as I say in my book, and you have to be persistent, and maybe you don't have to be so polite. You have to find who can help you, and the more family members that speak up and say, life is hell in my house and for my children, then things will shift over time. And pretty soon, 40,000 more service members are coming back from Iraq. So this isn't over.
So this has been recently then a diagnosis that has been recognized by the VA. And is it hard for somebody to be, recognized or diagnosed with
One
this?
thing I would say is, if you are a loved one who is experiencing this in your home, document it. Document, because they're going to ask you to prove it. They're not going to want to give it to you. That's what I hear. And even when my father went in to get hearing aids for hearing loss, I had to go in with him because they didn't want to give them to him. They wanted to say, no, your hearing loss is from something else. And I went in then when they denied him and said, no, I always remember him saying pardon, 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 and things like that, and then they gave it to him. So you have to write things down. Don't just slough it off. This is an illness. It's a result of what your loved one has done for our country, and so quietly just write it down, note dates, patterns, because you're not the only one. And that's a big part of it, is you're not the only one. I know there's a lot more resources online now for post-traumatic stress, and specifically combat-related post-traumatic stress, because there's all kinds of PTSD from lots of horrible things that can happen to people. But combat-related, it's because of a certain experience which we call war.
And if somebody wants to pick up a copy of your book, can they go online and order one? Or?
Yeah, it's called Accepting the Ashes. It's at Amazon.com, and my website is acceptingtheashes.net. You could find it there. There's a free audio version, a short version. There's different segments of the book online at my website. So if you know someone, learn more about it, because it's not going to go away.
And so I'll put a link to it, to your book, and if anybody in their family is suffering from this, or themselves are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, I would recommend.
You're not weak. You're not flawed for feeling it. Even the strongest, bravest men
and
experience, women. Yes, but especially men. It's like it can be a resistance to admitting it, especially for men. So men are not weak for having such reactions to experiencing war.
Well, I think that's a great book to have for people, and I look forward to reading it myself. Thanks, you.
Peter.
Alrighty.
From Occupy Tucson, 2011, right before the 10th Veterans Day. 11/11/11's coming up.
That's right.
Since 9/11/2001. So
now, aren't you having something for 11/11/11 on people that suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder?
Oh, at my website is a video version of an audio article that I narrated for Veterans Day, for this Veterans Day. So you can click. It's a YouTube. It's at the website.
I'll link it up here too.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming and being part of this interview.